Well, howdy, how are you doing? I am Ria, my call is N2RJ, and doing this on Monday. Some things, the stars didn't align for yesterday. I've been doing a lot of things in the house, which is, I'm kind of using a temporary streaming setup too. A lot of crazy stuff going on. It's summertime and springtime is when I do like all the little home maintenance and renovation. And this year I have a big push to do everything, get it done. Juan Luis Valentini, yes, I want to do a general class, and I want to do the extra too. So I want to definitely cover all three license classes. So before we start, this is Ria Shack Ham Radio, your place, your destination for ham radio. I am Ria, my call is N2RJ. I'm located in the great state of New Jersey, which it's sucky in many respects, but it's still home for me. Although things are getting better for things I love. Um, but, I enjoy ham radio. I've been licensed for pretty much almost 25 years. This year is year number 25, but I don't reach the anniversary until October 31st, which is when I first got licensed in Trinidad and Tobago. I did pass the 21st year in the US with the FCC license. So, I would appreciate if you're new to this channel, if you could like and subscribe. And for those on Team Replay, definitely, feel free to rewind and review everything you see here, because this is for you, especially those of you looking to get licensed. So you might want to get licensed for a number of different reasons. Ham radio is a big tent, and we welcome everybody. Of course, in the future, there's one thing I cannot talk about, but I will have something special for you guys who are looking to get licensed. Okay, should be out pretty soon. Anyway, tonight we're going to continue our series on covering the new technician pool, and I'm going to do the general and extra sometime. Okay, so let's not waste too much time. Let's get into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the entire pool with explanations as I know it, and I'm going to be interactive. So if you missed one before and you're catching up on Team Replay, please feel free to join us again. Okay? All right, let's see here. Hello, Paul. Long time no see. I need to talk to you guys on the radio sometime. Yeah, Paul's part of my regular little group. Okay, so here we go with Subelement T2 for operating procedures, where you'll learn basically the basics of operating. Okay? And by the way, those who are licensed already, this might be a good brush up. So we start with T2A, station operation, choosing an operating frequency, calling another station, test transmissions, band plans, calling frequencies, and repeater offsets. So the first one right off the bat, T2A01. What is a common repeater frequency offset in a 2-meter band? A plus or minus 5 megahertz. Since a 2-meter band is 144 to 148, or 144 to 146 in some countries, but in the US is only 4 megahertz wide, that's probably not going to fit. Plus or minus 600 kilohertz, yes, that's the answer. It's pretty much a standard. Plus or minus 500 kilohertz, not really. Plus or minus 1 megahertz, no, it's not the standard, even though some repeaters have it. There's a repeater here in New York, not here, but in this area, the KC2RA repeater, which is 1 megahertz, and that repeater was installed by none other than Bill Pasternak. So I'll explain what an offset is. So basically, when you have a 2-meter repeater or any repeater, you can't receive and transmit on the same frequency, right? So how a repeater works is that a repeater takes an input signal, it converts it to audio, and then probably adds some processing or whatever, and then outputs it as another radio signal. You can't do that on the same frequency. You have to do it on different frequencies for obvious reasons, because if you try to transmit and receive on the same frequency, you will end up feeding back into yourself here. So anyway, so what they have is an offset, and the standard offset on 2 meters is 600 kilohertz. So that means that the receiver and the transmitter are separated by 600 kilohertz, right? Or 0.6 megahertz. T2A02. What is the national calling frequency for FM simplex operations in a 2-meter band? So simplex means without a repeater. And there is a national calling frequency, meaning that there is a frequency, a meeting place, kind of like a lobby, virtual radio lobby, where you'd meet people, and then you then go off to another frequency. Usually you call people in that frequency and then you move up to another one. So the answer is A, 146.52. And so it's pretty much the one of the most popular frequencies ever, right? So you just got to remember 146.52. T2A03, what is a common repeater frequency offset in the 70 centimeter band? So the answer for that one is plus or minus 5 megahertz. So they have a lot more room on 70 centimeters, so they spread out to 5 megahertz, right? Interestingly enough, in a repeater, they have like these big, what they call duplexers, which are cavities that are tuned, and they very sharply reject frequencies, so you can have them that close. All right, T2A04. What is an appropriate way to call another station on repeater if you know the other station's call sign? You don't say break, 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 and then say station's call sign. That might be for emergencies, or that might be from CB radio. Just don't do it in ham radio. All right. The correct answer is B. Say the station's call sign, and then identify with your call sign. So basically, if I was calling, let's say I was calling K5ATA, I would say K5ATA, this is N2RJ, or I would say W1AW, this is N2RJ. K6LMS, this is N2RJ. And then they would answer back, N2RJ, this is K6LMS. You do not say CQ on repeaters. It's just frowned upon. It's not, it's not really a standard practice on repeaters to say CQ. In this country, I understand in some countries they do it, but not in the United States. Of course, that means C and D is out. T2A05. How should you respond to a station calling CQ? Now, this is on HF or even 2-meter single sideband, right? So transmit CQ followed by the other station's call sign. No, they're calling CQ. Why would you call CQ back? Transmit your call sign followed by the other station's call sign. No, that's not the order. It goes in. What you do is you transmit the other station's call sign followed by your call sign. So the station you're calling must always go first, followed by your call sign, which goes after. Okay? And don't jump to the signal report. Don't jump to the signal report. You're not that far yet, It's like a first date. Anyway, Hiken and Hammond, great. Thank you for the support, and I hope she enjoys it. All right. Digital Dreamer, yes, you can drop your call if you're wanting to break into a conversation, right? Like you have two or three people chatting, and you want to join in. You just say your call sign. Like I say N2RJ, and then they might say N2RJ. Go ahead, and I might say, hey, I just heard you guys talking this, that, and the other. May I join in? And then but so rarely people say no, but sometimes they might, and you just got to respect that. Okay, T2A06. Which of the following is required when making on-the-air test transmissions? A. Identify the transmitting station. I cannot stress this enough. Every single transmission ever must be identified. Okay? Meaning that you must identify every single transmission. Except there are rare cases, like, for example, you're doing remote control of like a model aircraft, right? And in that case, you have a, you have the call sign, like I mentioned, on the craft itself. Let me put myself up in this corner because I'm going to block by the bug, right? And then you don't worry about identifying on the air. You just identify on the device itself. But when you're talking on the air, when using Morse code, when using FT8, when using any type of test transmission, you always say your call sign. And what I usually do is I say N2RJ testing. Okay, so people know I'm testing, like I'm tuning up my amplifier. Well, when I had a tube amplifier, I say N2RJ testing. Okay? Okay, so I explained what a repeater offset is, so T2A07, and basically the difference between a repeater's transmit and receive frequencies. Like I mentioned, they can't transmit on the same frequency, so you have to offset them. You have to separate the receive and transmit so that they don't feed into one another. Okay? Right. T2A08. What is the meaning of the procedural signal CQ? Okay, now these are some ridiculous distractors. It doesn't mean call in a quarter hour. It doesn't mean test transmission. Okay, test transmission, you know, you just say your call sign or you say your call sign testing. Only the call station should transmit? No. D, calling any station. Okay, so this actually, CQ actually comes from seek you, like you're seeking somebody. Okay, seek you. Digital Dreamer, I got in the habit of ending every what? Every transmission with your call sign. Yeah, you know, at the end of the communication is required, okay, to drop your call sign, and every 10 minutes. T2A09. Which of the following indicates that a station is listening on a repeater and looking for a contact? And then, like I said, A, you don't ever say CQ on a repeater, so A is out. The answer is B, the station call sign followed by the word monitoring or listening, okay? Like I would say N2RJ listening, N2RJ monitoring, okay? And then somebody might pick up and then call me, N2RJ, this is KB2ABC, you know? And I would say KB2ABC, this is N2RJ. Okay. So T2A10, what is a band plan beyond privileges established by the FCC? It's a voluntary guideline for using different modes or activities within an amateur band. I'm going to show you what this is. So, because I actually do some, I'm part of the band planning committee of the ARRL, and we develop band plans. So basically, they're mandatory band segments, right? Like there are segments of the bands where you're allowed to do CW, Morse code, or voice, or digital modes, and then you know, so they get separated. But then there are frequencies like you might have the slow scan TV frequencies. Okay. So I'll show you this website here now. Let me see if I could bring up the camera and web browser. And let's see here. Band plan. Okay, right. So the band plan here, you could see here, they have 160 meters. You see 1.8 to 2 megahertz CW, 1.8 to 1.810 digital modes, and then etc. But these band plans are out of date, so we need to update them because 1840 is used for digital modes, right? And then you have a bunch of these here. So these are actually, you know, they're voluntary, right? Gentlemen's agreements, yeah, but you know, we're not all gentlemen, so you know, they're voluntary, okay? They're voluntary agreements, okay. I use the term gentlemen's agreements all the time too, so don't worry about it, right? I'm not offended. Before somebody called me woke or something. What T2A11, what term describes an amateur station that is transmitting and receiving on same frequency? Not at the same time, by the way, okay? Like you transmit and then you can receive while the other station is transmitting. It's not full duplex, right? Full duplex means that you're transmitting and receiving at the same time. Obviously, you're doing that on different frequencies, possibly different band. Diplex is not any sort of term, so forget that. The answer is C, simplex, okay? So somebody says they operate simplex. Simplex means that you are operating and transmitting on the same frequency, not at the same time. I always encourage all radio amateurs to develop the capability to operate simplex. Here's why. Repeaters fail. Power goes out, right? Trees fall on antennas. Repeaters might just go dark. The repeater owner might decide, you know what, I'm giving this up and moving to Hawaii or Florida or somewhere else, you know? So don't rely upon repeaters. Learn to do simplex. And what you need to do is you need to have a good antenna to go simplex, okay? So you probably want to invest in some beam antennas or at least high antennas that you could put up high, and that way you could operate simplex. Operating simplex, especially with mobiles and such like that. That way you build your emergency capability. All right, let's see what's next here. Okay. T2A12. What should you do before calling CQ? So there are a number of things you should do, and they're all here. So spoiler alert, all these choices are correct, okay? A, listen first to make sure that no one else is using frequency. Yes, you don't just get on and say, is the frequency in use without listening, because then you're a lid, right? You're basically just interfering with things that are in progress. Only after you listen, you can ask if the frequency is in use, right? So you listen a little bit, and you ask, is the frequency in use? And don't forget your call sign. This is N2RJ, okay? But I kind of think that C should go before B, okay? So you listen first, right? You make sure you're authorized. Actually, I would do this first, okay? Make sure you're authorized to use that frequency, because if you're a general or a technician, you're limited in bands and frequencies you can use. Even if you're extra, I cannot operate phone in the Morse code CW sections of the bands. So I make sure I'm authorized to use that frequency. I listen first to make sure no one else is using the frequency. Then I ask if the frequency is in use. And then I listen again, okay? I might ask a second time, is the frequency in use? And then after that, I can call CQ, okay? All right, so we finished with T2A very quickly. T2B, we're doing with VHF, UHF operating practices. FM repeater, simplex, reverse splits, access tones, and CTCSS, DTMF, DMR operation, resolving operational problems, and Q signals. Don't worry, you will figure out what these are coming up later on. So T2B01, how is a VHF/UHF transceiver's reverse function used? So remember I said that repeaters have an input and an output frequency, right? The input is the one the repeater receives the signal, and the output is where the receiver transmits back that signal out. But like I said, sometimes the repeater might fail. Sometimes you might be out of range. You want to see if you can hear the stations that's transmitting into the repeater. So what you do, on most radios, there's a button called rev or reverse or R, right? On most handheld radios and mobile radios. So you press that, and then you can listen on the input. So you can actually listen directly to station simplex, but they're transmitting on a repeater input frequency. So the answer is C, to listen on a repeater's input frequency. Okay? All right, T2B02. What term describes the use of a sub-audible tone transmitted along with normal voice audio to open a squelch of a receiver? So let's back up a little bit. A squelch, and you're probably going to have another question on this. A squelch basically is a circuit in the radio that will mute the speaker if it doesn't detect a signal, right? So you don't hear the static noise all day long, right? You don't hear static noise all day long, but if a signal comes in, it will open the squelch, meaning that it will turn on the speaker and you will hear the signal. And that commonly known as carrier squelch, okay? But that's not the correct answer, by the way. In addition to that, some radios have what you call tone squelch, right? Which is where they transmit a very low level tone, low frequency, right? Below normal human hearing. And also, it's within the range of human hearing, but it's so low that you can barely hear it. They transmit that long, but when the repeater hears that tone, the repeater will know to open a squelch. So it's called CTCSS, and this is a tongue twister, continuous tone coded squelch system. You might hear it being referred to as PL, or private line. PL is a trademark of Motorola. They developed that system called PL, and they initially used it for sharing frequency. So the answer is, what term describes the use of a sub-audible tone transmitted along with normal voice audio to open the squelch receiver? The answer is D, CTCSS. T2B03, which of the following describes a linked repeater network? And we have a number of these here, but I'll tell you what they are. A network of repeaters in which signals received by one repeater are transmitted by all repeaters in the network. So what you might have is, like, you might have one repeater in New York City, and you have a bunch of them, probably one in Connecticut, one in New Jersey, one in Boston, one in Florida. And then when you key up one of those repeaters, right, it will broadcast the signal to all the other repeaters, and all those other repeaters will also send out the same audio. Right? This way you can have wide area coverage. Sometimes it gets a little excessive, but you know, some of these things are good for covering large areas, large rural areas, and such like that. Okay, so the answer is A, a network of repeaters in which signals received by one repeater are transmitted by all repeaters in the network, right? And that's a linked repeater. T2B04. Which of the following could be the reason that you're unable to access a repeater whose output you can hear? Okay. So it could be that you don't have the correct offset. Remember I said some of them are not 600 kilohertz, okay, or some of them are on the wrong side, like it might be plus 600 or minus 600. If you use the wrong CTCSS tone, the repeater will not let you in. DCS is similar principle as CTCSS, except that instead of a continuous low-level tone, it uses a digital code. So there's a digital code, right, called DCS that goes into the repeater, comes out from the radio, the repeater receives it, and will digitally decode and open a squelch. If you don't have the correct code, it will not open a squelch. So all these choices are correct, okay? All right, T2B05. What would cause your FM transmission audio to be distorted on voice peaks? The answer is C. You're talking too loudly, right? So what happens is FM means frequency modulation, but generally if you talk too loudly, the radio's amplifier, microphone preamplifier might top out, or in some cases you do something called over deviating, which is where the radio signal shifts in frequency a little too much, and then the receiving end can't really handle it. Right, so you're talking too loudly if it's distorted. T2B06. What type of signal uses pairs of audio tones? So I might be showing my age, but the greatest thing ever was when we got a telephone in 1989. Okay, and my uncle had a rotary phone. Okay, at his hardware store. He had a business. He died, but the kids still have the business. But we got a touch tone phone. Instead of trying to figure out how to use that rotary dial phone, and all our pay phones were rotary dial phones too, okay? We had touch tones, we press them. When you press it, you hear two tones. And the tones correspond to the row and the column, okay? So that one is called dual tone multifunction. If you're Samuel L. Jackson, you might think it stands for something else, right? But no, it doesn't mean that. Dial tone mother, okay. Yeah, no. Dual tone multifunction, okay? So dual tones, two tones, right? So it determines it from the row and the column, and then multifunction. It could be used for a number of different things. We had a facility on a lot of repeaters called auto patch, which is where you could use it to make phone calls. See? And use that to dial out. Okay. T2B07. How do you join a repeater's talk group? So this is digital repeater. This is with DMR and such like that, okay? The answer is C. You have to program it into your radio. Now, the logistics of that is there's a file called a code plug, and you use a radio software, and you basically store that in your radio, and when you want to talk in that talk group, you dial that talk group in. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that because some repeaters don't support every talk group. T2B08. Which of the following applies when two stations transmitting on the same frequency interfere with each other? The answer is A, okay? So I'll explain A. So the station should negotiate continued use of the frequency. I'll tell you why these others are wrong. So if you do this, right, both stations should choose another frequency to avoid conflict. They might go in and interfere with each other anyway, okay? C is just wrong. I mean, interference is not inevitable. You both can negotiate like adults, right? Use subaudible tones so both stations can share frequency. No, because when the squelch open, both stations will still be audible and they'll be jamming each other. So the answer is no. So the answer is A. The station should say, well, okay, I'm going to go to this frequency, okay? Or I'm going to go to another frequency. Or we're going to have a nice little round table and we're going to continue using this frequency, right? Okay, that's the FRS way. Okay, that's so true, Lawnmower. T2B09. Why are simplex channels designated in the VHF UHF band plans? And the answer is so stations within range of each other can communicate without tying up a repeater. Don't be that guy, okay? You're the person who, and I know people who used to do this, okay? You have a ham 1 mile down the road, okay? And you have your radio, your 50-watt radio, right? And you crank that bad boy all the way up to 50 watts. And you go into the repeater, and your buddy also goes into the repeater. And both of you yakking away, okay? When you could just choose a nice simplex frequency and talk to your heart's content without tying up the repeater. Okay? So if you are within range of each other, and I used to enjoy simplex all the time because, one, I was free of repeater timeouts, meaning that if you talk more than a certain amount of time, the repeater is going to shut off temporarily to prevent you from yakking and burning up the repeater or just, some interference causing a repeater to just stay and transmit. And, so I'm free of that. And, it was just cool to test my simplex capability again. Okay, so T2B10. Which Q signal indicates that you're receiving interference from other stations? So the technician test quizzed you on Q signals. So Q signals are short 3-letter codes that start with letter Q. They're originally developed for Morse code telegraph operators. Then radio operators adopted them, and technician tests you on a few of them. There are a whole bunch of them. I would urge you to learn all of them. The ARRL has a listing. The ARRL handbook has a listing. ARRL operating manual, I believe, has a listing. There are a number of different other publications, free online, you could look and see. So the answer is A. When you hear somebody talking about QRM, they're talking about man-made interference, right? Like another station deliberately transmitting on top of you to make your life miserable. Or maybe they're just ignorant. Okay. Which Q signal indicates that you're changing frequency? Whenever somebody says they want a QSY, right? They're changing frequency. So you QSY. Okay. T2B12. What is the purpose of a color code used on DMR repeater systems? So the color code is kind of like the CTCSS tone, but it's a digital version. And it's exclusive to DMR. So A, it must match a repeater color code for access. Okay. T2B13, what is the purpose of a squelch function? I explained squelch. Then again, the answer is to mute the receiver's audio when a signal is not present, so you don't hear static noise all day. Okay, so and then once the receiver receives a signal from somebody transmitting, it will open up the squelch and you can hear them. Okay. All right. Hey, T2B was a nice short section. So T2C, public service, emergency operations, applicability of FCC rules, RACES and ARES, net and traffic procedures, operating restrictions during emergencies, use of phonetics in message handling. Okay. T2C01. When do FCC rules not apply to the operation of an amateur station? This is a trick question because you know what? In the United States, territories, possessions, and on U.S. flag vessels, in the high seas, in international waters, FCC rules always apply. Okay? The FCC does have some rules for special situations like emergencies we'll be talking about, but the FCC rules always apply. T2C02. Which are the following typical duties of a net control station? So think of a net control station as a traffic cop, right? Meaning that the net control station, he or she will be there directing the net and basically saying who could talk, right? And first of all, they take check-ins. Like when you have a net, you have people check into the net, and then so they have like a list of people, and then the net control will then go down the list and let people say their piece, and then they might go back to the beginning again, but they always stop for good nets, at least stop for emergency priority traffic and priority traffic first. Okay, and they also, out of curiosity, courtesy, let people who are on short time, who don't have a lot of time, let them say first. Okay, so the answer is C. The net control station calls the net to order, right? And directs communications between the stations checking in. Okay. Okay. T2C03. What technique is used to ensure that voice messages containing unusual words are received correctly? So, and I know a lot of hams get heartburn for this. I'm going to say it anyway. Spell the words using a standard phonetic alphabet. It's not the standard phonetic alphabet, although as a new ham, you should learn and practice the ICAO standard phonetic alphabet, which is Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, etc. Okay? Do that. But there are other alphabets that can be used. They're used in special circumstances. They're used to clarify words. But you know what? Learn the ICAO phonetic alphabet, and this way you are able to, understand that. Okay. T2C04. What is RACES? Not race like a bike race, okay, or the Amazing Race. We're talking about RACES. The answer is D, an FCC Part 97 amateur radio service for civil defense communications during national emergencies. So civil defense communications. So this was actually born, I think, was after World War II. They were looking for something called a War Emergency Radio Service, where they were looking to have civilians basically provide civil defense communications. That time you had to worry about nuclear attack. I mean, you kind of do have to worry about that today, but, but back then, they had the whole civil defense. You had the radiation kits. I have some of the radiation kits, by the way. Okay, they're fantastic pieces of history. I wouldn't count on them, but then you have the CD positions on the dial and such. Okay, so the way RACES works nowadays is towns and cities and such, they coordinate RACES, and RACES handles emergency communications and drills and such like that. I talked about it on this week's RIA Shack Radio, which is on the podcast, rjaram.podbean.com or n2rj.com/radio. No, sorry, radio.n2rj.com. That's actually a new URL I have, okay? All right, T2C05. What does the term traffic refer to in net operation? So the answer is simply messages exchanged by net stations, you know? And a lot of people check into net and say no traffic, okay? But yeah, no, if you have messages being exchanged, that's called traffic. Okay. T2C06. What is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, or ARES? The answer is A. It's a group of licensed amateurs who have voluntarily registered their qualifications and equipment for communications duty in public service. Okay? Public service means, you know, it could mean emergency communications, right? Or it could mean non-emergency communications like bike races and such like that. What this doesn't mention is that ARES is a program of ARRL, right? And ARRL coordinates ARES through its field organization. You have the section managers, you have the section emergency coordinators. So section emergency coordinators basically coordinates ARES on the local level. Then you have the ARRL headquarters, the emergency manager, that's Josh Johnson, KE5MHV. He handles the ARES on a national level. Okay, so yeah. T2C07, which of the following is standard practice when you check into a net? Right? The answer is C. Unless you're reporting an emergency, transmit only when directed by the net control station. So a general rule of every directed net is that you only speak when spoken to. Okay? So the net control station says N2RJ, please go ahead. And I say, yeah, this is N2RJ. We're going to talk about the weather. We're going to talk about colonoscopy. Kidding. Okay, we're going to talk about the weather. We're going to talk about this, that, and the other, you know, and then back to net. Okay? Easy. Yeah, you don't need to do any of this other stuff. But if you have emergency traffic, right, the net control station will usually stand by at the beginning of the net for emergency or priority traffic. You know, they usually give this clear space so that stations reporting bona fide emergency or priority traffic have that ability, and they're not mashed on by the other stations trying to check in, right? So that's always a good thing. Like I said, you know, as amateur radio operators, one of our basis and purpose is a public service in times of emergency. So, you know, it's not the only thing, but it's an important thing. T2C08, which of the following is a characteristic of good traffic handling? And the answer is A. Pass messages exactly as received, verbatim. Don't, you know, you don't make decisions. You just pass the message. T2C09. Are amateur station control operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privileges of their license class? So any radio amateur, right, may use any means of communication at their disposal for the immediate safety of life or protection of property. A good example of this, okay, is if you are in a burning building and your only radio that's working is an HF radio, okay, and you're a technician and you don't have privileges to transmit on HF, you can use that HF to call for help. Or you're visiting a ham, right? And then this person has a medical emergency, okay? Maybe a heart attack or something, or a seizure. You you know, you don't have a 2-meter radio. You try on your 2-meter radio, nobody's answering, okay? The cell phone's not working either, okay? So you go on HF as a technician and you call for help. You find a net, maybe the maritime net or something, or some other net. They're always talking about how they're doing emergency response. And you do that. So whenever it's the immediate safety of life or protection of property, okay? Okay, you may transmit. Any other time, no way, Jose. T2C10. What information is contained in the preamble of a formal traffic message? So formal traffic would be something like NTS, National Traffic System, which is run by the ARRL. Or there is also the Radio Relay International is another organization that passes formal traffic. So what they do is they send something called radiograms, which have a header, they have a preamble, which talks about tracking information of the message. And then they have the actual message itself. So the header, the preamble, is the information needed to track the message. Okay. T2C11. What is meant by check in a radiogram header? So check basically means like checksum, to make sure that you got the message right. Okay. So the answer is A, the number of word or word equivalents in text portion of the message, right? And that's it. So basically, it's just to make sure the message is correct. Okay, so we're done with subelement T2. Let's go on to subelement T3. I hope that was nice and easy for you, and that my explanations are clear. Radio wave propagation. This is a fun one. Okay, so we're going to be talking about characteristics, how a signal travels, fading, multipath, polarization, wavelength versus absorption, antenna orientation. Right? So T3A01. Why do VHF signals strength sometimes vary greatly when the antenna is only moved a few feet? And the answer is C, multipath propagation cancels or reinforces signals. So in physics, with waves, there is a principle of constructive and destructive interference, right? So when two waves are the same waves are superimposed on one another, it gets stronger. But when they're superimposed and they're kind of like out of phase a little bit, they cancel out each other. That's how like these noise canceling headphones work, by the way. Okay, so when it's out of phase, like they're slightly off, they're off of each other, opposite of each other, you find that they cancel out. This is most pronounced in big cities. So what happens is, like in New York, you have like these big buildings, and these powerful radio signals, they bounce off the buildings, and you might have like one signal arriving from a different path. Like you might have one direct from the transmitter and the one reflected from the building. And because the one reflected from the building might have bounced around a few times, it probably arrives a little bit delayed, and it might cancel out the one direct from the transmitter. Okay? Okay, so, and that's the principle of multipath. Okay? T3A02. What is the effect of vegetation on UHF and microwave signals? The answer is absorption. Trees are full of water, okay, and water tends to absorb RF. That's how your microwave oven works, by the way, okay? So water, especially water with sugar in it, it will absorb radio waves and it'll heat up. T3A03. What antenna polarization is normally used for long-distance CW, Morse code, and SSB, voice, contacts on the VHF and UHF bands? So horizontal. So polarization basically means how the antenna is oriented, and the radio waves subsequently are oriented this way. But you can have vertical polarization, up and down, or you can have horizontal polarization, basically aligned with the horizon. Hi, UberGeek318, nice to see you. Yeah. T3A0. So basically for single sideband and CW, weak signal work, you tend to have it horizontally polarized. For FM repeaters that you're just talking around town with, you want them vertically polarized. T3A04. What happens when antennas at opposite ends of a VHF or UHF line of sight radio link are not using the same polarization? So if the receiving end is vertical and the transmitting end is horizontal, the answer is B, the received signal strength is reduced, because yeah, you will still receive some signal in the different polarization, but it will be much less. Okay. T3A05. When using a directional antenna, how might your station be able to communicate with a distant repeater if buildings or obstructions are blocking direct line of sight paths? So I mentioned the signals that bounce off radio waves. So the answer is B, you can find a path that reflects signals to the repeaters. So you're using that to your advantage. Okay. The first time I ever heard of the term picket fencing was my friend in Trinidad, Eric Mackey, 9Z4CP. He was a local weatherman. Now I think he works with ODPM, the Disaster Preparedness and Management. So basically, you'll hear a rapid flutter on the mobile signal due to multipath propagation. So you'll kind of hear like a, as you're talking, and it will flutter in and out, right? So that's picket fencing. T3A07. What weather condition might decrease range at microwave frequencies? Well, since water absorbs radio waves, especially at microwaves, because raindrops are so small that they're actually the same wavelength, the same size as microwaves, right? And because of that, they absorb the microwaves really well. Unfortunately, this is why if you have like a satellite TV dish, one of the small satellite TV dishes, it doesn't work in the rain properly. So the answer is C, precipitation. T3A08, what is a likely cause of irregular fading of signals propagated by the ionosphere? So, multipath, it also happens naturally with the ionosphere. So you might have like a ground wave, right? And then you might have a ionospheric sky wave. And then where I live, it's kind of like far from the radio stations, the AM radio stations like WABC. So because the ionosphere keeps constantly changing, I will get the signals arriving at different paths, and they'll fade out. So the answer is D, random combining of signals arriving via different paths. T3A09, which of the following results from the fact that signals propagated by the ionosphere are elliptically polarized? Okay. So the answer is basically either horizontally polarized antennas or vertically polarized antennas may be used for transmission or reception. So long story short, elliptically polarized basically is sort of like a combination between horizontal and vertical polarization. So if you're sending signals via the ionosphere, meaning you're operating HF, DX, long distance, you can use a vertical or horizontally polarized antenna, and it doesn't matter. The other side will receive you just fine. Okay? So T3A10, what effect does multipath propagation have on data transmission? So again, if you have multipath, you'll have the signal changing in signal strength. You know, on the TV, old TVs, you might have seen like ghosting, right? You might see like the TV picture might have like a ghost. That's due to multipath. But on digital, especially even with digital TV, by the way, error rates of digital transmissions will increase because it will have a very damaged signal reaching, and it'll cause errors. So the answer is D. T3A11, which region of the atmosphere can refract or bend HF, VHF radio waves? So it bends it, it goes up, it bends it to go back down to the Earth. The answer is C, the ionosphere, of course. So the ionosphere refracts radio waves down, and is why we have worldwide communication on HF bands. T3A12, what is the effect of fog and rain on signals in the 10 and 6 meter bands? Little effect, because like I said, the wavelength, meaning how long it takes for a wave to complete one cycle, is so long on the 10 and 6 meter bands compared to a drop of rain or droplets of water for fog, that they don't really, the fog does, the radio waves don't really get absorbed by rain and fog on those lower bands. Let's see, T3B, electromagnetic wave properties, wavelength versus frequency, nature and velocity of electromagnetic waves. Okay, so my personal feeling is that this should have gone before the last one, because there are some things that depend on this. But we're going to power through it anyway. Okay, so T3B01. What is the relationship between electric and magnetic fields of electromagnetic waves? So there are always two components of every electromagnetic wave. This includes radio waves, this includes light, this includes radiation. And the electric field and the magnetic field are always at right angles to each other. Okay, so the answer is D, right? Frankly, as a technician, you don't have to understand this, but you have to remember this, okay? T3B02, what property of a radio wave defines its polarization? The answer is A, the orientation of the electric field. So how you orient your antenna determines the orientation of the electric field, which determines the polarization. T3B03, what are the two components of a radio wave? Well, we already talked about them. You have an electric field and a magnetic field, right? That's why it's called an electromagnetic wave. T3B04, what is the velocity of radio wave traveling through free space? So it's the speed of light. I mean, light itself is an electromagnetic wave, so, you know, light is, it's the speed of light. T3B05, what is the relationship between wavelength and frequency? So as the frequency increases, right, the wavelengths get shorter, right? Because the wave is cycling so fast, it takes a shorter distance to complete one cycle. So the wavelength gets shorter as the frequency increases, right? That, by the way, is why on HF you have big and ugly antennas, whereas on VHF and UHF you can have smaller antennas. T3B06, what is the formula for converting frequency to approximate wavelength in meters? So, I hate to break it to you, my fellow Americans, but all this radio stuff is in metric. Okay? That's kind of a bummer because I know you guys grew up with feet and inches and such like that. So you might have to learn a little metric, but that's okay. So the speed of light is 300 million miles per second. Sorry, not miles, meters per second. Okay, I believe. So you see, I'm thinking in American too. So generally, the wavelength in meters, right, equals 300 divided by the frequency in megahertz or millions of hertz, right? So, for example, the wavelength of, of, let's say, 160 meters, right? So, let's say I have like 1.5, 1.5 megahertz. So 300, sorry, let's make it easier. 2 megahertz, okay? So 2 megahertz would have a wavelength of 300 divided by 2, 150 meters, right? And then after you have it in meters, you can convert it to imperial units. T3B07. In addition to frequency, which of the following is used to identify amateur band? And A, the approximate wavelength in meters. Approximate, okay? They're not exact, they're approximate. We don't have channel numbers. This is not CB radio or FRS or GMRS. T3B08, what frequency range is referred to as VHF? So that's 30 megahertz to 300 megahertz, okay? You just got to remember that. It goes with basically, speed of light. So you have 3 to 30 is classified as HF, 300, 30 to 300 is VHF, 300 to 3 gigahertz is UHF, and so on. What frequency range is referred to as UHF, T3B09? The answer is 300 to 3000 megahertz. So that's 300 megahertz to 3 gigahertz. T3B10, what frequency range is referred to as HF? So HF is 30 to 300 megahertz. I'm sorry, 3 to 30 megahertz. Yeah. So it starts at 3 megahertz. So that means actually 160 meters from 1.8 to 2 megahertz is actually not on HF. It's in medium frequency band. Okay. T3B11, what is the approximate velocity of a radio wave in free space? 300 million meters per second. Okay? Not miles per hour. Meters per second. They stick with this metric business. The ARRL could mount a campaign to the IAR to get the bands and rods or furlongs instead of meters. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see now. One country put man on the moon, the rest of them use the metric system. Okay. That's going to change when China puts somebody on the moon, okay? T3C, propagation mode, sporadic E, meteor scatter, auroral propagation, tropospheric ducting, F region skip, line of sight, and the radio horizon. T3C01, wire simplex UHF signals rarely heard beyond the radio horizon. Well, my friends, UHF signals are not propagated by the ionosphere. So the ionosphere, like I said, it could refract and bend radio waves, but it's reliable. The problem is that UHF signals just pass straight through, so they can't get refracted. What is a characteristic of HF communication, T3C02, compared with communications of VHF and higher frequencies? The answer is long-distance ionospheric propagation is far more common on HF, okay? So literally I can go on HF at almost any time and find some way to work DX, some way to communicate far away. T3C03, what is a characteristic of VHF signals received via auroral backscatter? So the aurora, is like the northern lights and such like that, and that helps with radio wave propagation too. B, they are distorted and signal strength varies considerably. T3C04, which of the following types of propagation is most commonly associated with occasional strong signals on the 10, 6, and 2 meters bands from beyond the radio horizon? And we're experiencing it now. It's called sporadic E. The sporadic E is usually happens in the summer of each hemisphere, and you can work some pretty long DX. You can communicate. I've been talking to Europe. Some people have been talking to Japan and Korea and such like that too. T3C05, which of the following effects may allow radio signals to travel beyond obstructions between the transmitting and receiving station? The answer is A, knife edge diffraction. So knife edge diffraction is like you have like a mountain or a ridge or something like that that's like, it's more or less sharp, right? For a radio signal. So the radio signal reaches there, it gets obstructed, but it also gets like bent over it and downward into the valley, okay? T3C06, what type of propagation is responsible for allowing over-the-horizon VHF and UHF communication to ranges of approximately 300 miles on a regular basis? The answer is A, tropospheric ducting. So the atmosphere, the upper atmosphere has a layer called the troposphere. What happens is you have something called a temperature inversion, where normally you have hot air rising and cool air sinking. Well, sometimes you have that inverted, and that causes radio waves to get trapped in there in ducts, okay? And then eventually it'll leak out and reach a distant place. I actually do a lot of TV DXing that way, by the way. I could listen to, I could watch distant TV station. T3C07, what band is best suited for communicating via meteor scatter? Okay? And the answer is 6 meters. So you normally hear these people using software. They use JTDX, not JTD, WSJT, and we use a protocol, a mode called MSK144. But in the old days, we actually used Morse code. And what we had was we had a tape that was had the message so fast, right? We played it back like lightning speed several times, and then eventually the receiving end would receive it, and one of them might get through. Okay, and that of course they play it back slowed down. There is today, of course, we use digital modes, but there's actually a system by I can't remember which government agency, but It's called snowtel, right? And they use it to measure snowpack. And they use meteor scatter to communicate. T3C08. What causes... Oh, it's the Department of Agriculture, believe it or not. What causes tropospheric ducting? D, temperature inversions in the atmosphere. We explained that. Okay. T3C09. What is the best time for long-distance 10-meter communications, 10-meter band propagation via the F region? So the F region is the main region of the atmosphere that refracts radio waves. It's responsible for most of HF propagation. The answer is A, from dawn to shortly after sunset during periods of high sunspot activity. And this is called the gray line. Okay, so the gray line is basically from that magic witching hour between sunrise and sunset. T3C10, which of the following bands may provide long-distance communications via the ionosphere's F region during the peak sunspot cycle? The answer is 6 and 10 meters. So usually when you have a lot of sunspots, you find that the higher bands, like the higher frequency bands, like normally we get propagation on 20 meters, which is 14 megahertz, and 40 meters, which is 7 megahertz, pretty much all the time. But when the solar cycle, the 11-year solar cycle, this goes up to the peak, we get 6 and 10 meters, opening up a lot more, right? And you get like even 15 meters and 12 meters too. So the answer is A. T3C11, why is the radio horizon for VHF and UHF signals more distant than the visual horizon? The answer is C, the atmosphere refracts radio waves slightly. Okay, so that's elements 2 and sub-elements T2 and T3, right? I'm going to try to do some more in between T4 and the rest. We're going along at a pretty good clip. So, we're going to hopefully get that done. This weekend I'm going to be in Los Angeles. I'm actually going to be up in Roland Heights with EcoFlow. We're going to be showing off the new PowerKits RV system. I'm actually going to test its suitability for rovers as well too. So if you're in LA and you want to hang out, let me know. Send me a message. You can find me on social media. You can find me, or you can leave a comment. Just let me know where you're at. Or you can send a message to ria@n2rj.com, and I'll be there. So my friends, thank you for joining us for another installment in this technician class. And I hope some of you veteran hams learned something. Always willing to share knowledge. Okay, until next time, my friends, peace and 73s.